So in this section, we're going to be talking about using equations to solve percent problems. In the next section, 7.2, we're going to talk about using proportions. Equations are very useful for a lot of situations. So we're going to start with talking about basic percent statements, which I recommend you doing with word problems because it makes them easier to solve so that everything is consistent. And I'll show you what I mean. So first, we're going to talk about basic percent statements and how to understand them. A percent statement is in basic percent statement form when it's written as like this. A percent of the whole is a part. So we have percent of whole is part. Okay, so let's try to keep that in mind as we do these next few problems. So we're going to put these statements down here into basic percent statement form. Okay, so all of them are kind of in a different order. So we want to start with the percent. So this first one, we're looking at the percent first. So 10% is what we're looking at first. So we get 10% of the whole. So what is the whole? 5 or 50. So 5 is 10% of 50. So 10% of 50 is 5. If you're going to turn that around and say it in a different way. So we're trying to be consistent so that then you can put these into the form of an algebraic equation in the next section. Okay, 30 out of 100 is 50%. So 15% of 200 is 30. Okay, so the rest of these I'm going to have you try without me, and then so pause the video and try these next 4 and see if you can get them, and then I'll write them down and you can come back and check. So here are your answers. 25% of 32 is 8. 50% of 18 is 9, 20% of 65 is 13, and 60% of 30 is 18. Make sure they make sense to you after you write them down. Okay, so now that we figured out how to put them in the correct form written, we're going to look at how to put them into algebraic equations. So we're going to talk about translating into equations, so from English to math language. So 1/4 of the price. What that means algebraically is 1/4 of, which means times, the price. 1/4 of the price. So 25%, we have to put it in decimal form first. So we'd say 0.25 times the price. So you can use decimals or you can use fractions with percents. Because now that we've talked about how to convert between them, you can use any of those things. So make sure that you know that of means times, or we use the dot usually, and is means equals. Okay, so make sure you know that. So with that information, we're going to take what we learned just previously. A percent of a whole is a part, then translates to percent times whole equals part. So instead of we have times, and instead of is we have equals. So now suddenly it becomes an algebraic equation. So be sure that the percent is either a decimal or a fraction. It's got to be one or the other. You can't do this with it in its percent form. It's got to be in the decimal or fraction form. So let's look at some examples. So 24 is 40% of 60. So we're going to put this in the basic percent statement form. So we get 40% of what? Of 60 is 24. Right, so we're going to put this as an equation. So 40% we need to put that in decimal form. So that becomes 0.4. Of becomes times 60 equals, because that's is, 24. So if you can put it in this format first, it will make creating the equation so much easier. All right, so I'm going to do one more and then I'll have you try the next two. So this next one, 11 out of 44 is 25%, so let's put it in the other form, the basic percent statement form. 25% of 44 is 11. After you write this, make sure it makes sense. So that means 0.25 times is of 44 is 11. And double check if you're doing this and make sure that it actually is 11. So you can take it on your calculator. 0.25 times 44 is 11. All right, so you try the next two, and then I'll put the answers up. So pause, give it a shot, and come back and check your answer. Okay, so for C, you get 60% of 15 is 9, so 0.60 times 15 equals 9. 35% of 20 is 7. 0.35 times 20 equals 7. All right, so let's move on to solving some percent problems. So remember, there are three parts to a percent problem. There's the percent, there's the whole, and there's the part. Any of these three things can be the unknown. So the first step is to set up an equation, just like we've been doing, but with x as the unknown. So we're going to practice this by just setting up an equation. So we're going to start with the sentence, and then we're going to turn it to an equation. What percent of 80 is 6? So we're going to say x percent of 80 is 6. Okay, so now we're going to turn this into an algebraic equation. So we get x times 80 equals 6. And we're not going to solve it, we're just practicing doing this first. And a lot of people would like to rearrange this to say 80x because it looks more like an algebraic equation, and that's just fine. All right, so the next one is, what number is 20% of 300? All right, so think about this one for just a moment. 20% of 300. So we get 20% of 300 is what number? Okay, so we're going to rewrite this as an algebraic expression. So we get 0.20, so that's putting the percent in decimal form. Of is times 300 equals x. And that one's pretty easy to solve. You just multiply them to find x. All right, so the next couple are for you to try. So give these a shot, pause the video, come back and check your answers. Okay, so for the first one, x percent of 15 is 3. So x times 15 equals 3, or you can rearrange it to look more like algebra without the times sign. 15x equals 3. And then b, 6% of x is 9. So 0.06 times x equals 9, and you can rewrite that without the times sign. It's not much different, but 0.06x equals 9. All right, so moving on, we're going to look at solving more equations. So I'm just going to do a bunch of problems and then give you a few to try. Okay. So we've got 5% of 80. 5% of 80 is what number is going to be x. Okay, so we're going to say 0.05 times 80 equals x. We don't even have to rearrange this one. You're just going to take 0.05 times 80, and you're going to find that 4 equals x, or x equals 4. All right, the next one, what number is 16% of 87.5? So you're going to set this up as 16% of 87.5 is x. All right, now we're going to make it algebraic, and we're going to say 0.16 times 87.5 equals x. So 0.16 times 87.5 is you just put that in your calculator. You don't have to rearrange anything, and you get 14 equals x. Okay, the next one, 72%. So 72% of what number is 90? So we get, I'm going to come up a little bit so I have a little bit more space to solve this. I've got 0.72 or 0.72, however you want to write it, times x equals 90. Now to solve this, we're going to have to divide both sides by 0.72. Put that in your calculator. 0.72 divides out and leaves x by itself. 90 divided by 0.72 is 125. So 72% of 125 is 90. Go back and double check and make sure it makes sense. Okay, the next one is what percent of 84 is 28? So we're going to set this up as X percent of 84 is 28. And so we get X times 84 equals 28. We're going to divide both sides by 84. And we get that X equals 0.333 repeating, which we want to put this in percent form because the question is what percent. So this is a decimal and we need it in percent form. So that's going to be 33.3 repeating percent. Okay, the next one, 9 1/5 is 8% of what number? So the first thing I want to do is say 9 1/5. We want to put this in decimal form because it's just hard to work with fractions. So go ahead and put 1/5 in your calculator and you get, don't forget the 9, 9.2. Okay, so 9.2 is 8% of what number? All right, so 8% of what number is 9.2? All right, so we get 8%. Oops, sorry, I'm going to fix that. Got distracted there. 8%, you can't do math with a percent, you've got to put it as a decimal. So 0.08 of X means times X is 9.2. Now we're going to solve for X by dividing both sides by 0.08. And we get X equals 9.2 divided by 0.08, which is 115. So go back and double check. 9 1/5 is 8% of 115. That makes sense. So make sure it does. All right, the next one, 7.8, is what percent of 65? So 7.8 is what percent? So we've got what percent is going to be our X. So X percent of 65 is 7.8. So be careful with the way you set these up. We're going to turn this into, I'm going to come up a little bit so I've got room. X times 65 is or equals 7.8. We're going to divide both sides by 65. And we get X equals 7.8 divided by 65 is 0.12. Now remember, we need a percent, so we're going to change that by moving the decimal place over 2 places to the right, and that becomes 12%. So 7.8 is 12% of 65. That makes sense, so make sure it does. All right, what percent is 52 of 13? So X percent of 13 is 52. So I just want to point out that this one is tricky. Everybody always thinks that the bigger number goes here, but remember you can have percents greater than 100. So what percent is 52 of 13? So the of 13 means that the of 13 goes here. Okay, so be careful. All right, X times 13 equals 52. So I'm going to divide both sides by 13, and I get X equals 52 divided by 13 is 4. So now what do you do with 4? It's supposed to be a percent. So remember, you're going to move the decimal place over 2 places, put zeros in there, and stick your percent sign on. So you get 400%, which makes sense. 52 is 4 times 13, so it's 400%. Now I have a whole bunch for you to try, just as many as I just showed you, and all of them are similar to what I just did. So let's do the first 4. Pause the video, try these 4, I'll put the answers up, and then I'll give you the next 3 or so. Okay, so for A, you should get 42. 6% of 700 is 42. B, you should get 15. C, you should get 140. So 15% of 140 is 21. And for D, you should get 66.6%. So remember to convert it from a decimal to a percent. All right, I've got a few more here for you to try. So try these three, pause the video, and then come back and take a look. For E, you want to change 6 2/5 to 6.4. So 32% of X is 6.4. You change 32% to 0.32 because it's a percent and you have to have it in a decimal form to do the math with it. So you get 0.32 times X is 6.4. Divide both sides by 0.32 and you get 20. So 32% of 20 is 6.4, and that does make sense. All right, F, X percent of 90 is 4.5. So you're going to divide both sides by 90 after you set it up. And you get 0.05, and remember that that needs to be put into percent form. So you move the decimal place 2 places to the right. Same with G. This one was tricky because you're saying X percent of 14 is 42. So the numbers seem backwards, but go with it, and what you get is X equals 3. The decimal point was here, and you're going to move it over 2 places to the right and get 300%. So does that make sense that 42 is 300% of 14? Yes, it is. It's 3 times. So it's 300%. That is the end of this video. In the next video, we will talk about solving using proportions.